Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the second installment, our second half of our Christian responsibility in addressing global warming. In our first week, last Sunday, we went over our personal behaviors, conservation, recycling, how we behave as consumers, going out and buy things, kind of cars we drive. And then we also discussed that in personalizing our beliefs in climate change, etc., and doing what we think is the right thing and stuff, that it might make us prone to start judging people who don't necessarily do those things, and that we divide the issue along political lines, which is a big mistake. All right, it only makes it worse, and that is in fact what the powers that be that are causing this want us to do. They want us to focus on each other. Polarization drives this issue as much as anything else. Individual behaviors contribute, but they're not the root cause, okay? So, first off, to understand, why our government is the way it is now with regards to this critical issue, how not only unresponsive, but downright destructive they are in contributing to it, all right? We have to examine all the aspects of what's going on in our society relative to this topic and what the underlying truths are, all right? The first thing is language, okay? Let's look at the most fundamental failure that is at the root of our social and governmental failure, and that is winning the conversation, the argument, the decisions. You cannot win a conversation with someone who changes the basic inherent logic of the meaning of words. Okay, the argument has been corrupted intentionally. It started with the Bush administration about 2 years after Inconvenient Truth, all right? Now, I'm going to go to one of my favorite guys, Gore, all right, who has said this in about 1 million different ways, and he's actually paraphrasing William Randolph Hearst from about 1890. After he got whipped by Teddy Roosevelt. As societies grow decadent, the language grows decadent too. Words are used to disguise, not to illuminate. Action, you liberate a city by destroying it. Words are to confuse, so that at election time, people will solemnly vote against their own interests. Does that sound familiar? Has that been happening? Darn right. All right, so let's take some samples of decadent language, shall we? Right? Decadent language. Liberating Fallujah. Think about that. When we liberated Fallujah, we did something a little more than just liberate it, didn't we? Yeah. War on terror. It's like saying the war on love, fear. What other human emotion can we declare war on? And by the way, how appropriate is it to declare war on a human emotion? Alternate facts. That Kellyanne Conway chestnut. Fake news. Who uses that? Environmental regulations. Think about this. Now you're thinking, what? Environmental regulations? Yeah, decadent language. Climate change. Decadent language. So, let's unpack these, shall we? We didn't liberate, we destroyed Fallujah. We bombed it flat, we killed virtually everybody we could find in there that we didn't think was an ally of ours. That's not liberation, folks. That's aggression. War on terror? No, war on hostile foreign nationals. Doesn't quite roll off the tongue. It's a lot harder to get all enthused about that.
Brown foreign nationals, brown skin.
Thanks for, that definitely makes it a little more easy, if you will, okay? Alternate facts? No. Alternate fictional substitute narrative. Fake news? No. Factual reporting that contradicts my narrative. Right? It's almost a given. Environmental regulations? No. They are laws. Now, we are a society of law. We love our Constitution. We love the law. But by golly, ever since Ronald Reagan, government is the enemy, not the cure. Regulations have been vilified. A regulation, by the way, is not necessarily compliant or enforceable with penalties. Laws are. They're not going after the regulations, they're going after the law. All right? For the first 2 years after inconvenient truth. We talked about it as climate change, because that's the way Al Gore presented it, climate change, all right? But it is global warming, and that's what Al Gore really said in the film. And the Bush administration spent the next 2.5 years changing the public dialogue in the media, the White House press conferences, congressional discussions about the environment to say climate change instead of global warming. Well, why? What's so different from climate change versus global warming? What's the ambiguity of it? And I'm going to show you. Now, is there any state that's been more ravaged by global warming? Weather events, hurricanes, environmental degradation from industry than Florida? I mean, Florida's like 4/5 of its border is either the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic Ocean. It's what's for breakfast if you're a hurricane, right? Okay. No, it's not working. Oh, there we go. Okay, by changing the word from global warming to climate change, we're given banalities like this in discussing the ongoing crisis. Humans are not responsible for climate change in the way some people are trying to make us believe, for the following reason. I believe that climate change is changing because there's never been a moment when the climate is not changing. Well, thanks, Marco. That was helpful and kind of stupid, okay? Now, I want you to think about this. Substitute global warming for climate and change, okay? Humans are not responsible for global warming in the same way people are trying to make us believe. For the following reason. I believe that the globe is warming because there's never been a moment when the globe is not warming. False. All right? So see, this is the difference between a banal kind of, truthy sounding piece of BS versus the truth, right? It goes beyond just decadence. They even outright forbid the use of even climate change in the state of Florida. Again, this is old Governor Rick Scott, now Senator Rick Scott, all right? Employees from the Department of Transportation, Department of Health, and South Florida Water Management District said they were told to not use climate change and global warming in reports or other documents. Rick Scott denies the allegations, saying his office has never ordered any ban on such terms. The Herald printed the actual copies that were circulated about a month later, okay? Senator from Florida. So this is the guy to replace Ron DeSantis, who ran a fairly racist campaign against, I believe, the mayor of Tampa. Is that right? And he's actually been kind of a surprise. Okay? He's actually done first year in office, done some important environmental initiatives in the state. He still, though, has stopped short of a comprehensive plan to cut greenhouse gas. Well, what has he done? Well, several of his early environmental directives are aimed at cleaning up water and helping Florida adapt to the effects of global warming, including more intense hurricanes and sea level rise that threatens to swallow parts of the state in the coming decades. He called for appointing chief science officer to coordinate scientific research, and he stated in opposition to fracking and offshore oil and gas activities. Now I can only imagine the alarm bells going off in the American Petroleum Institute when this came out. And I would not be surprised to see Mr. DeSantis get challenged in the Republican primary the next time he's up for election as a result. All right? Where does this come from? And this is Florida. This is just the whole country is like this, especially with regard to the Deep South, the plains, and the mountain states, where the primary industries are involved are agribusiness, fossil fuel production, mining. Yes.
Can I just add that the government in the state of Florida is not working with any comprehensive plan to deal with the rising sea levels, which is leaving the cities up to come up with their own.
Right, yeah, and we have periodic, not just associated with storms, actual flooding in Miami, just from a high tide.
But it's because it's on coral, and the water comes up through the coral. You can't block it out.
Right. And it's getting worse.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of a sobering thing. So where does this reticence to speak about truth about the climate, greenhouse gas emissions, and fossil fuels come from? Why the double talk lies, the false narratives presented as facts? Where does all this bad faith come from with people?
Money.
What he said. All right? Now, I should have changed this to say meet the Koch brother because David died a couple of months ago. Well, these two guys are the sons of, Koch Sr. bought one of 4 oil refineries established during the Second World War with special proviso that allowed them to refine Canadian oil. Our domestic production was not enough to fuel our war efforts, so they legalized importing Canadian oil, and his dad bought a refinery in Minnesota that had that proviso, highly lucrative. They still are, by the way, and because that proviso is in effect. And he also revolutionized the process of a much more modern way to refract gasoline out of crude oil. So he's a true believer, right? This is the fossil fuel industry. He's a perfect example, all right, of the special interests who don't want us talking about this right now, except maybe recycling, and how we save energy in the house and stuff like that. That's what they want us to talk about. They don't want us to talk about what we're going to talk about right now, all right? The Koch brothers' individual efforts to undermine policies on climate change and other problems are bad enough, but the system they pioneered bodes even worse for the future of American democracy. The Koch network, the brothers and their affiliates, all right, spent some $900 million on political activities during the 2016 election. That's a huge amount of money. It's nearly $1 billion funded to pro-fossil fuel candidates nationwide. Now, when you say Koch brothers, if the conservatives have managed to take the animosity that a lot of people are feeling towards these guys and make it sort of a tinfoil hat issue, like these guys are the bugaboo of the liberal agenda to take away your big cars and cheeseburgers, all right? But it's true. The Koch brothers really are behind a lot of this, and their affiliates. You can't say it's just them. It's quite a few people. The harvest of the Koch brothers' innovation is an American political system that lies supine at the feet of moneyed interests. The majority of lawmakers and presidents no longer even pay lip service to the idea of getting money out of politics. And by the way, that's true for a lot of Democrats, too.
Better believe it.
Obama forego public funding for his campaign. You know why? Oh, Hillary Clinton, tight with Wall Street, tight with the fossil fuel industry.
Elizabeth Warren has said that if she does win the nomination, she will do the same.
Yeah. Okay, why is Washington not able to pass legislation to fight climate change or eradicate the lethal gun culture? Despite clear evidence that a majority of ordinary Americans are desperate to see action. Because big money is on the other side, and the Koch brothers were among the pioneers. And by the way, the Koch brothers don't care about gun rights or any of that stuff. They don't care about women's reproductive rights. They don't care about any of those red herring third rail issues that conservatives just are whipped with all the time, that gets them foaming, They don't care about that, but they see it as a means to an end, to get those compliant servants into the House of Representatives, the Senate, the Cabinet, and the presidency. Now, these are the coalition groups in the Koch Freedom Coalition. You can always tell when there's some pro-corporate conservative group where they have either heritage or freedom or some, banal, who's against any of those things? Americans, yeah, okay. So these are some of the PACs, and these PACs are like a little toolbox, depending on what the issue is. The opposition candidate they want to defeat, or the ballot referendum, like a transit bill, or an environmental bill, or a school funding bill, anything that they think is going to take away money that they could otherwise use for pro-fossil fuel infrastructure or tax cuts, right? And so Americans for Prosperity, they typically go after things like transit bills, highway bills, public infrastructure. American Future Fund, they typically go after initiatives that, want to level out the tax base to where it's not so it doesn't favor everybody at the top and just grind other people up at the bottom. All right? American Commitment, that is basically international efforts to, get pro-American governments, using our diplomatic powers to get pro-American governments and pro-fossil fuel industry governments in worldwide. American energy lines, all energy initiatives. Anytime you see, more stringent, more stringent regulations of effluent, atmospheric discharge, et cetera, those guys come out. Concerned women for American action, women's rights, education. Concerned veterans for America, let's improve the VA. Not without these guys around. They'll sell that improvement to the VA as socialism or a huge waste of money or actually harming veterans. All right? No, this does not, and it doesn't include the recipient groups that these guys fund all this money through. All right? And it doesn't include the money we spend on lobbying efforts. They spend on lobbying efforts. Okay? And by the way, these recipient groups, again, include the NRA, Americans for Tax Reform, Club for Growth, and shell entities that don't really exist, but only to receive money legally and then fund it to its actual use. I mean, this is a very elaborate system. Okay, the total cash dispersed in 2012 was $470 million. In 2016, $900 million. It's on track to go above $1 billion in 2020. And Trump's already got $120 million, and we're not even within the same year yet of the election. All right? And by the way, conservatives like us, right? People in our income brackets, in our backgrounds, et cetera, like that, if you're a conservative in that strata, you typically don't give a lot of money to your political causes because you don't have to. You got these guys up here doing it for you. Why would you waste your money if someone else is going to cover your tab and your self-interest, your perceived self-interest? So, you got to have a talking point if you're a conservative guy and you're going to go against a popular opinion. So they have these little think tanks all over the country. The Cato Institute being the most significant one, I believe, is located on Stanford, where, by the way, the Koch brothers built a large library on behalf of Stanford University, at Stanford University, on the condition that it be named after Antoine Scalia, who wrote the majority opinion for Citizens United. No coincidence, folks. All right? The Koch Institute is like Americans for Prosperity. It basically likes to focus on transit initiatives and state and local initiatives that reduce pollution, improve transportation utility, invest in growing cities that are more livable. All right? And this one in particular is about making sure that in 2020 that we don't let the federal program that provides matching funds to cities for transit initiatives. They don't want to renew that. Saving cities from bad federal policies. And this is all built on a bunch of lies, folks. I'm telling you, if you read it, it's amazing. I can assure you that this kind of propaganda is to public policy what chloroform is to critical thinking. And I see conservatives make arguments based on these kind of white papers all the time. They do not bear scrutiny. They're loaded with fallacies of logic. They are corrupt at their core. Here's an example. Nashville in, I believe, 2018 had a ballot initiative that, of course, the conservative legislature put on an off election because they didn't want it on a 2-year election where you have real turnout. That's their first strategy. Make sure that any of these ballot initiatives, like it happens here too, they put it on a special election. Yeah, exactly. And oh, by the way, the attack ads on those initiatives come from these same groups. They're funded by the exact same groups. All right. So Nashville had 65% support for this initiative when it got placed on the ballot. All right? By the time all the attack ads came out and all that, they lost 2%, 48 to 52. Right? It would have offered an alternative to people who would be willing to give up driving, who's going to build a lot of light rail, all right, and extended bus service. Its opponents landed their best blow by arguing all these bus lines and light rail would actually cut traffic for everyone who stayed behind the wheel. In other words, I'm not gonna take public transit if I have it as an alternative, and if I vote for this, it's not gonna reduce congestion. And by the way, that's true. You build 5 more lanes of highway, and they're gonna be full. If you build it, it will be full at rush hour. The way to address urban congestion like that is to go to staggered work rules, staggered work hours, 4-day work weeks, et cetera, et cetera. You have to address it from a much broader sense than just building more capacity, because that capacity gets filled like a hose, all right? But it would be nice to have an environmentally viable alternative that you can live with. I personally, if I take public transit, it's gonna take me almost 2 hours to get out to Lawrenceville to my office. I can do it if I'm willing to spend a total of 2 hours commuting, right? Sorry. All right, Nashville's pro-transit groups knew this and tried to make the point. As for why it didn't stick, one could point to the anti-transit blitz funded by Koch brothers, backed Americans for Prosperity, including, quote, highest sales tax in the nation and it won't fix traffic. Or maybe these people in the suburbs were just acting out of their self-interest. And this is a true quote, and this tells you how big an issue we have to heal our urban, our sprawl, which is at the root cause for a lot of the highway congestion and pollution that we're seeing in our atmosphere, for instance. You can't easily reverse 50 years of rapid, low-density development, like Gwinnett County, for instance, by laying track and tossing in a bunch of bus lines. It doesn't work. It's not efficient enough. There's not enough bus lines in the world to touch every little neighborhood. People have to be within walking distance of a transit stop, or else you're going to be driving to your transit stop. All right? So, when Trump got elected in 2016, he was all big. Remember, he was big about infrastructure? That included a buttload of money for Amtrak. Well, naturally, Cato comes out with this thing about how inner-city rail systems are obsolete, and it's just nostalgia that's driving us to want to have those things. Yeah, right. Okay, it's not just things like transit. Okay, this Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee is an appointing committee, and it provides the EPA with scientific guidelines for their policies. And it's now stuffed with a bunch of industry hacks, just like the EPA at the top, all right? And they're coming up with wanting to relax the content of particulate matter from power plant generation. Particulate matter, little bits of stuff that comes out with the smoke out of the stack. Now, where does that go? It goes into the lakes, goes into the ground, goes into your lungs.
But let's call it what it really is, carcinogenics.
Yeah.
Okay?
Right.
It's not only particulate matter, it's carcinogenic.
So, well, it's a lot of things, not just carcinogenic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to get you more one way, okay? And so they're basically saying that they can't really attack your revulsion at this notion that we're going to increase this, but they can attack the reporting on it. They're going to attack the messenger. So they go after NPR for reporting it as fact. Okay? Great white paper. This one really, I love this one. This is so perfect because I can show it in just one slide. Should you be worried about mercury emitted from power plants? Okay. And then they use this horribly exaggerated, example. I forgot exactly what this is called in logical fallacy, but only if you're a pregnant woman who during gestation consumes about 220 pounds of fish caught exclusively from the top 10% most polluted freshwaters in the United States. Despite all the signs along these rivers and lakes warning, do not eat the fish. Okay, and so in other words, they want to soften this up with the idea that they're going to want to let them emit more mercury out of smokestacks, all right? And then the paragraph at the bottom, a little background. Mercury emissions aren't a direct threat to humans, but instead settle into water bodies and then make their way up the aquatic food chain. Because mercury is a neurotoxin, you can stop right there. I mean, really? What? This is intellectual chloroform is what this is. All right? Now, how do they do this? All right? How did we get to this point where our public policy is corruptly driven by the very corporations and individuals who benefit the most from it? Tax code that is highly skewed in favor of corporations and the 1%. All right? Citizens United, that decision was like a harpoon in our democracy. Awarding corporations the rights of the individual, specifically the right of anonymity, and equating corporate money with free speech. Subverting campaign finance laws, so they can win at the state level to facilitate gerrymandering, voter suppression, in turn winning them electoral votes per state and the Senate. The Senate is wildly powerful body as far as appointing judges, at least, right? Likewise, those red state senators, currently in the majority, pack the courts with pro-corporate judges. And why do they do this? Why do they lie about global warming? Dissemble about the root cause of the ongoing collapse of the ecosphere.
So do Democrats.
Yes.
Okay.
That's true. It's not just Republicans. But not all Democrats are in the pocket of the GOP like the Republicans, with maybe Ron DeSantis, for example.
But the leader of the minority in the Senate gave a pass to every judge that was nominated by the Trump administration.
They rubber
Just
stamped.
signed off on it.
They rubber stamped the whole thing. Okay, the carbon budget is the reason. This is exactly what we were talking about last week. The carbon budget, weighing our usage of carbon against that 2% increase in global warming that they say is the tipping point. If we are 2 degrees on the average, 2 degrees Celsius above our global average by 2030, we will have destabilized the environment sufficiently to where we can expect massive weather, crop, social, you name it, disruptions. Okay? Limiting global warming to 2 degrees Celsius means that a limited amount of greenhouse gas we produce. This limit is referred to as the carbon budget, because that greenhouse gas is related to a finite amount of carbon. You burn this amount of carbon and you're going to get to that 2%. All right? By the way, this strikes terror into the hearts of the fossil fuel industry, agribusiness, plastics, minerals, you name it. All those big, and all the people who own them. All right? And by the way, if you own a mutual fund, it's likely going to affect that too. I mean, it's not all the bazillionaires, you know. I mean, everybody's going to take a hit in the shorts financially if we're successful. All right? To meet this limit, we have to leave up to 80% of our fossil fuel in the ground. This is referred to as unburnable carbon. This implies that continued investment, I first heard about this in 2005 or 2006. And it kind of just, it was so shocking to me that I actually suppressed it. I don't want to think about that. All right. This implies that the continuing investment in developing carbon fuel, that is, converting fossil fuel resources into monetized reserves at the current rate, would create a worldwide capital write-off of approximately $6.74 trillion US, nearly twice the GDP of Germany. Boom, just like that. All right? That everything becomes worth less if you, on a global scale, if you incinerate that amount of money at once. All right? As that asset becomes unburnable. And oh, by the way, Citigroup in 2015 says it's a lot higher than that, maybe as much as $800 trillion, because we're not only talking about the monetized value of the fossil fuel we leave in the ground, we're also talking about the enormous infrastructure associated with those reserves. All of a sudden, what are they good for? Moving salt water from one side of the earth to the other? Sorry. Now, I'm not going to talk to this, but this is where I've got the following. This is actually a breakdown of that fossil fuel reserve that we can use versus the one we can't use. All right? And this is from the University of Oxford's Global Change Data Lab. It's a very interesting series of slides. They're very technical and very dry, but if you can see the underlying truth in and feel it, they are very alarming. All right? This pie represents what we think we know is the total amount of fossil fuel resource in the world today. All right? Now, there's a difference between a reserve and a resource. A resource is out there, but we we haven't necessarily identified it. We think it's out there. We're pretty sure it's out there. So this gray area, for instance, is fossil fuel that is under the deep sea ocean or in areas where it's really unviable to get at. All right, it exists out there. All right, and this is fluctuating as our technologies change. For instance, the resource would have been smaller before they developed fracking technology, for instance, where we can extract natural gas, which is fossil fuel out of shale and limestone. Okay. However, the colored parts are monetized reserves. All right. They represent a chunk of asset in your mutual fund. They represent a tradable, leverageable asset to corporations and governments. Third world country has a significant fossil fuel resource. They get a geologist to estimate its size and an economist to price it, and they can use that as collateral for developmental loans from the advanced world. All right? Mom? Yes?
This is sort of veering us in a different direction, but have there been any studies of changing our energy research to something non-carbon and how much it would cost?
There are two significant, to answer your question, there are two significant alternatives in terms of this issue to fossil fuel energy, all right? And we're gonna talk about that a little further. But one is nuclear power. Well, that's popular, isn't it? I'll tell you, I will take nuclear power any day over, watching the world starve in 15, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. In a heartbeat, I'll go with nuclear power. There are consequences, but we should be an advanced enough society to be able to manage those responsibly, all right, and intelligently. We can put a man on the moon, right? Okay. Win World War II? Anybody? So, all right. Okay, the other one, by the way, is renewables. Solar power,
Wind power.
wind power, and I hate to say it,
Causes cancer though.
hydroelectric, no, it kills birds. Hydroelectric. All right? Okay, so the colored part are the stuff that we've monetized. So you have a burnable reserve. The green part, that's the part we can actually burn and make that 2% Celsius, 2030 goal. All right? All right. The other one is unburnable reserve. All right? That is the red, and that is monetized, and we can't burn it. So this is a huge, huge loss of worldwide capital. And this is why the Koch brothers, and when you see ExxonMobil advertise about how make plants more like plants and things like that. I mean, that's where all that comes from. They don't want us to know this. They don't want us to recognize this as one of their main drivers. They don't want us to pass laws that keep them from getting to this. I'm going to illustrate that very vividly right here, okay? Okay. Climate resolutions fall short at ExxonMobil's annual meeting. ExxonMobil beat back shareholders. This is in 2016. ExxonMobil beat back shareholder resolutions about climate change that would have reoriented the oil and gas giant towards renewable energy, forced it to disclose lobbying details, and install a board member with expertise in the area of climate change. Sounds like a good idea to me, okay? Sister Patricia A. Daly is an activist shareholder from a Dominican nun from New Jersey, who's an executive director of the New Jersey-based Tri-State Coalition for Responsible Investment, advocated a measure that would request the Exxon board to commit to supporting the goal of limiting warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius, saying as the world moves forward, ExxonMobil stands still. ExxonMobil CEO said that there is no scientific basis for establishing an international target of limiting global warming to 2 degrees Celsius, and that's false, all right? And that it was a societal choice. Such choices, he added, must be grounded in reality. No energy source on the planet, except for maybe plasma, right, would be able to sustain our economies, our way of life, or I would say our very survival. There's a certain amount of truth to that, but it assumes that we can't change. We can't come up with new technologies. willing to go anywhere. This assumes that we're going to be static and basically crash test dummies for the next 10 years in dealing with this. All right? He said energy efficiency measures would keep down greenhouse gas emissions. But he said that 2040, oil and gas would still account for 60% of the global energy needs, about the same percentage as today. And that is true too. Remember, when we talked about third world prosperity increases, they want electricity and they want air conditioning, and that doesn't come out of nowhere.
But if we don't change.
Yes.
It's only if we don't change.
That's right. So a motion to install a board member with expertise on climate change won 20.9% of shares cast. Now, that's disappointing, but I want to, truth be told, and I have a mutual fund, and I found I actually have an energy component in there, and it's not with ExxonMobil, it's with another one. But it's actually a good investment for a mutual fund. Energy companies generally make money, all right? But because it's a mutual fund, my proxy is represented by the fund's manager or his appointee at this meeting, and he's going to vote to keep that climate change expert off that board because he sees it as going to impact the value of that fund, all right? So, when you delegate your investment responsibilities to a fund manager, you're paying him to make you money. You're not paying him to make a morally conscious and just decision. There's a huge conflict of interest in that for anybody who owns stock or in mutual funds that have energy as a component, all right? You can't assume that that fund manager is going to represent your best interests or your wishes.
You actually can choose something like Domini or Calvert or one of the...
There are alternatives funds, yes, there are.
Make those choices.
So, and again, this goes back to what we were talking about last week, mindfulness about our decisions in buying and consuming and investing.
Yes, that's huge.
It is huge. But it's a hidden one. A lot of people just completely oblivious to that, myself included. I'll be the first to admit it. I was very chagrined to learn this as I further looked into this, unpacked this and think. Because, the last thing you want to do is be just a flaming hypocrite. Right? I mean, it hurts. All right. Other shareholders said, and this is the money shot, so to speak. Other shareholders said that if the international community were to stick to its target of limiting climate change to 2 degrees Celsius, much of ExxonMobil's 25 billion barrels of proven oil reserves and natural gas equivalents would be stranded and useless. And who was that Exxon CEO? Our former Secretary of State. Now, does anybody really think that the fossil fuel industry does not control our government? By the way, he's not a bad guy. He's really not. He resigned for a good reason. Now, he ran the State Department pretty poorly, but by golly, he stood up to Putin, even though he was drilling over in Russia. Crying out loud. But this guy is not demonstrably evil or, like some character out of a Bond movie. He's an Eagle Scout from Houston, for crying. Okay. This is who he replaced him with. Mike Pompeo, the hand-picked congressman from the Koch brothers in Kansas. He's having a good weekend. Oh, we got rid of, Scott Pruitt, who was the Attorney General for Oklahoma and basically an attorney for the fracking industry, had 19 active lawsuits against the EPA. Well, we got rid of that corrupt character, and who do we put in? A coal industry lobbyist, an attorney, Andrew Wheeler. Now, doesn't he look like some sort of white-collar criminal straight from Central Casting? I mean, the visuals here, I know that's a real cheap shot, but the visuals here are just remarkable to me. Now, this seems like it just goes on and on and on when you look at Trump's cabinet, right? Okay, Wheeler rolled back in Obama-era rules that significantly increased the energy efficiency of light bulbs. He wants to go back to incandescence? Really? Announced the rollback, and by the way, that was purely to keep Trump happy because it's an Obama-era rule. Trump's all about repealing anything Obama did. That has nothing to do with anything. That's just spite. But he's got to keep his boss happy, keep his job, and he's got to keep that job to keep the people he works for happy, and that is the fossil fuel industry, the coal industry. Make no mistake. Announced the rollback of, set up, again, Obama-era Clean Water Act rules, which expanded bodies of water in the U.S. were protected by the Clean Water Act's limits on pollution. Pruitt relaxed the guidelines preventing water runoff from strip mining getting into local creeks. That was one of the first things Scott Pruitt did, and he's expanding on that. And again, the fact that it was an Obama-era rule made it, a target list. Loosened federal rules surrounding the regulation of methane emissions into the atmosphere. Now, we looked at that big pie chart of anthropogenic, greenhouse gas last week, and methane's a big component of it, and it is bad. All right, it takes forever to biodegrade in the atmosphere. And allowing oil and gas companies to police themselves on emissions. This is interesting. Allowing oil and gas companies to police themselves on emissions. This change was made at the request of the natural gas industry, which produces natural gas, which is primarily methane. Okay? Announced that President Obama's clean power plan would be replaced with a much weaker alternative, and if this isn't decadent language, I don't know what is. The Affordable Clean Energy Rule. Cutting car emission standards across the U.S. while simultaneously revoking the state of California's right to set its own greenhouse gas emissions. It's astonishing. All right? This is the EPA. It's no longer the Environmental Protection Agency, it's the Environmental Predation Agency. All right? Oh, over in Interior, we get rid of Ryan Zinke, who's a corrupt individual, right? And we replace him with this hack, who's basically an attorney for the fossil fuel industry, okay, specifically oil and natural gas. In just 9 months at the helm of the Interior Department, David Bernhardt has not only worked to reward his former lobbying clients, he's also gone on a hiring spree of extremists who share his goal of helping industry benefactors at the expense of America's land and wildlife. He's selling off public lands for mineral and energy development. Right? Okay. We get into it. We're going to wrap this up, and we're going to look at a couple more slides, and if we have enough time, we can have some more Q&A. The environment does not need martyrs. It needs pragmatic, committed activists. Every bit of energy we waste on ineffective, virtuous action is energy that should be spent on defeating Republicans and who, at least for now, are wholly in the thrall of the fossil fuel industry. All right? With a Democratic Congress and a Democratic President, the United States could be making progress on global warming in 2021. And incidentally, that would be true of any Democrat. The Green New Deal is an appealing slogan and a provocative program, but specific, by the way, this is Rabbi Jay Michelson again. Okay, let me finish. But specific policies are a distant second when it comes to global warming, to placing scientifically based realists in position of power. It's not too much to ask. The sole focus of anyone alarmed by global warming should be electing Democrats or any ideological stripe to a federal and state government. And that's not necessarily true. We've seen Ron DeSantis is doing some good things. And he's not off the hook. But it's not axiomatic that a Democrat's always going to represent the best interests of the climate. Is it? No.
No, that was the point I was going to make.
Right. Second, the focus on individual behavior, and this goes back to last week again. The focus on individual behavior makes fighting global warming more controversial while letting the actual entities causing climate change off the hook. As Elizabeth Warren recently pointed out in an exchange on CNN, individual sacrifices, and she mentioned straws, light bulbs, and cheeseburgers, are exactly what the fossil fuel industry hopes we're talking about instead of what we just looked at. They don't want us talking about that. They want us talking about last week, right? What we talked about last week. So, save the earth? No. It's a myth that we have to save the earth. Frankly, the earth doesn't need to be saved. Nature doesn't give a hoot if human beings are here or not. The planet has survived cataclysm, catastrophe for millions upon millions of years. Over that time, it is widely believed 99% of all species have come and gone while the planet has remained. Saving the earth is really about saving our environment, ourselves, making it safe for ourselves, our children, and the world as we know it. If more people saw the issue as one of saving themselves, we would probably see increased motivation and commitment to actually doing so. This is Kate Marvel's a climate scientist at Columbia University and NASA's Goddard Institute. All right, there are solutions to this problem. We don't have to go this route. We're not doomed unless we choose to be. It's a huge choice, and it's going to be a difficult one. I'm not going to say everyone's going to pay. We're all going to pay. We're going to be poorer. We're going to have less choices. We're going to have to make harder decisions. We're going to have to be, I got to do this, and if I do this, I can't do that. I mean, it's going to, we have to change our belief that we have limitless resources and anything's possible. We've got to live in the reality of where we are as a species. Right. Oh, it's you know, that's a good, I don't know off the top of my head, but I would tell you that since the refugee issue in Europe and North America is primarily driven by climate refugees now, all right, not just civil war and social entropy. Yeah.
So what would it be, what's your idea on like automobiles, like for energy, I mean, other than the...
Well, I think we have to re-examine, you know, the idea that every time we got to go someplace, we get in a car. Number one, number two, we got to look at what kind of car we drive. Is it too big? Number three, we have more efficient vehicles and probably go to electric cars and have better alternatives. Walking, biking, public transit.
I don't know enough about nuclear, but I know you can get like a little tiny thing in there that it can run off, like for things like trucks or like locomotive engines that require a lot of, to it.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if that's...
Well, there is definitely an initiative to develop nuclear power at a transportation level, but it's considered too risky.
What we have to do, I think, is we mentioned World War II and mobility of the United States in answer to World War II. We have to treat this in the same manner that we do World War II, which means we have to change the fundamental economic driver.
Agreed.
And
right.
then the industry and market will respond to that.
Last cell. Let's care for our world right now. This is a prayer. This is the last paragraph of the encyclical, 2015, that got Francis in trouble with every corporation on the planet. All right? God of love, show us our place in this world as channels of your love for all the creatures of this earth, for not one of them is forgotten in your sight. Enlighten those who possess power and money, that they may avoid the sin of indifference, that they may love the common good and advance the weak, and care for this world in which we live. The poor and earth are crying out, O Lord, seize us with your power and light. Help us to protect all life, to prepare for a better future, for the coming of your kingdom of justice, peace, love, and beauty. Praise be to you.
Oh Lord, seize us. Seize us and shake us by the shoulders.
I want to thank you for attending the second session, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, it was great. Thank you.